The letter was already on her desk when Nora Caldwell arrived at 7:15 on a Monday morning. She noticed it before she noticed anything else. Before the stack of briefs she'd left untouched since Friday. Before the cold coffee someone had left by her keyboard. Before the blinking light on her office phone indicating 17 unheard messages. The envelope was standard issue, institutional white, but it had been placed precisely in the center of her desk blotter. Not slid under the door, not left in her mailbox down the hall. Someone had walked into her office and set it there deliberately. Nora stood in the doorway for a moment, her coat still on, her bag still over her shoulder. Then she crossed the room, picked it up, and read it standing. It was a formal notice of performance review, accelerated, unscheduled, effective in 2 weeks. She read it twice. Then she set it back down on the desk, exactly where it had been, and went to hang up her coat. Nora Caldwell had spent 22 years at Hargrove and Lund, a mid-sized financial consulting firm with offices in Atlanta, Chicago, and Boston. She had started there at 33, hired as a senior analyst at a time when the firm had exactly 4 black professionals on its payroll across all 3 locations. She was now 55, and she was the firm's chief risk officer, the first black woman to hold that title, and, depending on who you asked, one of the sharpest risk analysts in the Southeast. She did not say that about herself. Other people said it. She was the kind of person who let other people do the talking while she did the work. She had not received a performance review in 6 years, because the last one had been perfect, and the one before that had also been perfect. And at some point her supervisor at the time had said, "Nora, we both know this is a formality," and she had agreed and signed the paperwork and gone back to her office. The notice on her desk was not a formality. The review had been requested by Edmund Halsey. Nora knew his name before she'd ever met him, because names like Edmund Halsey tend to precede the person. He had come to Hargrove and Lund 8 months earlier as the firm's new executive vice president of operations, transferred from the parent company's Dallas office following what was described in the official announcement as a strategic realignment of leadership. Nobody in the Atlanta office knew exactly what that meant. There were rumors. There are always rumors. Edmund Halsey was 58 years old, with the kind of silver hair that looks curated and the kind of handshake that is always slightly too firm. He had a way of walking into a room as though he'd been asked to evaluate it. He called women ladies in meetings. He used the word optics 17 times in his first all-hands address, which Nora counted because she counts things. It is her job to count things. In the 8 months since his arrival, he had quietly restructured 3 departments, replaced 2 department heads with people he'd brought from Dallas, and proposed a new internal audit framework that, Nora noted immediately, contained a fundamental misunderstanding of how the firm's risk exposure was actually calculated. She had written a memo about it, a thorough, detailed, meticulously sourced memo. She had sent it to Halsey directly, copied HR, and filed a digital record. He had never responded. 3 weeks later, she found out he had presented a modified version of the audit framework to the board, without the corrections she had outlined, without acknowledging her memo, and without her name anywhere on the document. Nora had sat with that information for 4 days before she decided what to do about it. She did not yell. She did not go to HR, not yet. She did not send a heated email. What she did was schedule a one-on-one meeting with Halsey and walk into it with a printed copy of her original memo, a printed copy of the framework he had presented, and a 2-page summary of every discrepancy between the 2 documents, organized by category and potential financial consequence. She set all 3 items on the conference table in front of him and said, "I'd like to discuss the audit framework." Halsey looked at the documents. Then he looked at her. He smiled, the kind of smile that is not really a smile, and said, "Nora, I appreciate your diligence, but I made some adjustments based on board preferences. You understand how it goes. I understand that the adjustments introduce a gap in our regulatory exposure calculation that could cost the firm between $3 and $7 million in the event of an SEC inquiry," she said. "I'd like to walk you through it." He had let her talk. She talked for 12 minutes. He nodded in the right places and said, "I'll take it under advisement," and I hear you, and let me loop in the right people. She had heard all of those phrases before. She knew what they meant and what they didn't mean. What they did not mean was that anything would change. The performance review notice appeared on her desk 6 weeks later. Here is what Nora Caldwell did not do. She did not panic. She did not call her husband at work and spiral into a 45-minute conversation about what it meant. She did not go home early. She did not take the following day off. She did not complain to her colleagues, not even Phyllis, her executive assistant of 11 years, who had seen everything and would have understood. What she did was sit down at her desk, open her computer, and begin building a file. Nora was a risk analyst by training, and a risk officer by title, and a documentarian by nature. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, she pulled every email she had sent and received, involving Halsey, every meeting note, every memo, every version of every document with its metadata intact. She requested, through official channels, copies of the board presentation materials. She compiled a timeline, not emotional, not editorial, just factual, of every interaction she'd had with Halsey since his arrival, every proposal she'd raised, every response she'd received or not received, and every decision that had been made in the shadow of those interactions. She also called her attorney. His name was Raymond O.C. Kufor, and she had known him for 15 years, and when she explained the situation, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Send me the file." She sent him the file. Meanwhile, the performance review process had begun. Hargrove and Lunn's HR process for accelerated reviews required a preliminary assessment period, during which the reviewing executive, in this case Halsey, was expected to document specific performance concerns with supporting evidence. The HR director, a woman named Carol Finch, who had been with the firm for 30 years and had the expression of someone who had heard everything, handled the scheduling. Nora came to the preliminary meeting, dressed the way she always dressed, understated, precise, a charcoal blazer she had owned for 9 years because she believed in buying things well and keeping them. She brought nothing to that first meeting except a notepad and a pen. She sat across from Halsey and Carol Finch and said, "I'm ready to hear the specific concerns." Halsey had prepared a document. It was 4 pages long, and it outlined, with varying degrees of specificity, a set of concerns about Nora's communication style, her resistance to operational change, and what he described as a pattern of undermining executive decisions through unsolicited escalation. Unsolicited escalation, Nora repeated. The memos, Halsey said. The pushback on the audit framework. A few of the board members have mentioned. Which board members? He paused. It's been communicated to me. I'd like the names, please, she said, or a record of the communication, for the file. Carol Finch wrote something on her notepad. Halsey moved on. He cited her failure to adapt to the new operational structure, which he had implemented 4 months earlier, and which Nora had in fact adapted to completely. She had the project metrics to prove it, though she said nothing about that yet. He cited a meeting in February in which she had, according to his account, challenged his authority in front of junior staff. Which meeting? She asked. The February 14th risk alignment session. I have notes from that meeting, she said. May I ask what specifically was said? He described a version of events that bore partial resemblance to what had actually happened. Nora listened to all of it without interrupting, without changing her expression, without doing anything except occasionally writing a single word on her notepad. When he finished, she said, "Thank you. I'll need copies of all supporting documentation by end of week, per HR protocol. I'll have my own response ready within the review window." Halsey looked at Carol Finch. Carol Finch looked at her notepad. Nora's response was 41 pages. She was not trying to overwhelm anyone. 41 pages was simply what the documentation required. She organized it into 5 sections, a rebuttal of each specific claim, supported by contemporaneous evidence, a timeline of the audit framework dispute, including metadata from both documents proving her memo predated the board presentation, the original performance records from the past 6 years, which included 6 consecutive exceeds expectations ratings, a comparative analysis of her project outcomes against the departmental benchmarks Halsey himself had established, and a brief final section written in plain language, describing the sequence of events as she understood them. She titled that last section simply, "What I Believe This Is About." She did not use the word racism once in the document. She didn't need to. The pattern spoke clearly enough in the facts. Raymond Osikafor reviewed the full document before she submitted it. He called her afterward and said, "Nora, this is extraordinary." "It's accurate," she said. "That's what I mean." She submitted it on a Thursday afternoon through official HR channels with read receipts enabled. The review board convened 3 weeks later. Hargrove and Lund's review board, in cases of disputed performance assessment, consisted of 3 members: a senior partner, an independent HR specialist brought in from outside the firm, and a representative from the parent company's compliance division. The process had been invoked only twice in the firm's history, once in 2007 and once in 2011. Both times it had been settled internally. Both times the outcome had favored the reviewing executive. Halsey, Nora later learned, had been informed of both precedents. The session was held in the firm's largest conference room, the one with the long mahogany table and the windows overlooking Peachtree Street. Nora arrived 7 minutes early and arranged 3 copies of her full response document at her seat. Halsey arrived exactly on time, flanked by a man Nora didn't recognize, who turned out to be a consultant he had brought in from Dallas. The board members arrived last. Senior partner Douglas Whitmore, who was 71 years old and had known Nora for 15 years. The independent HR specialist, a woman named Audra Penn, who had flown in from Cincinnati and whom nobody had met before, and the compliance representative from corporate, whose name was Lawrence Chen, and who carried a laptop and said nothing to anyone during the preliminary proceedings. Halsey went first. He presented his case, the 4-page document, the concerns about communication and adaptability, the narrative about the February meeting. He spoke for 22 minutes. He was polished. He was confident. He had done this kind of thing before. Then he made a mistake. It was subtle enough that someone not paying close attention might have missed it. He referenced, in support of one of his claims, an internal risk report that he said Nora had failed to deliver on schedule, a report from the previous October. He said the late delivery had caused delays in the Q4 audit cycle. Nora looked at her notes. She found the page she was looking for. When it was her turn to speak, she did not begin with that. She went through her rebuttal methodically, section by section, in the same order she had organized her written response. She was calm. She was specific. She cited document numbers and dates and email timestamps. She was not performing calm. She was calm, which is different, and the difference is visible to anyone watching closely. Audra Penn was watching closely. When Nora reached the section on the October report, she removed a single sheet of paper from her folder and placed it on the table. The October risk report, she said, was submitted on October 9th. The deadline was October 15th. I have the submission confirmation here with the timestamp. I also have the email from Halsey's office acknowledging receipt on October 10th. She placed a second sheet on the table. The Q4 audit cycle did not begin until November 3rd. There was no delay. The room was quiet. She looked at Halsey. He was looking at the 2 sheets of paper. "I don't know if this was an error," she said, "or something else, but I want it on the record either way." Douglas Whitmore, who had been in the legal and financial industry for 46 years, and who had the permanent expression of a man who had stopped being surprised by human behavior sometime around 1998, leaned forward and said, "Edmund, do you want to respond to that?" Halsey said, "My records may have there may have been a miscommunication with my team about the timeline." "A miscommunication," Audra Penn repeated. She wrote something. Lawrence Chen, the compliance representative who had said nothing for the past hour, opened his laptop. The board did not issue its findings that day. Boards rarely do. They thanked both parties, collected all submitted materials, and said they would have a written determination within 10 business days. Nora walked out of the conference room at 4:47 in the afternoon. Phyllis was waiting in the hallway outside, not because she'd been asked to wait, but because Phyllis had been with Nora for 11 years and understood certain things without being told them. She looked at Nora's face and didn't ask any questions. She just handed her a cup of tea, the right kind, in the right cup, at the right temperature. Nora took it and said, "Thank you." "How did it go?" Phyllis asked. "We'll see," Nora said. She meant it. She had learned, over 22 years, not to claim victory before it had been confirmed in writing. The world had a way of surprising people who assumed too much. She was not someone who assumed. But she had seen Audra Penn's expression when Halsey said, miscommunication. She had seen Lawrence Chen open his laptop. She had seen Douglas Whitmore look at Halsey with the particular stillness of a man re-evaluating something he thought he already understood. She had also been in enough rooms to know what those things meant. The determination arrived in 9 business days, which was 1 day ahead of schedule. It was thorough. It was unambiguous. It found, in formal language that managed to be both precise and damning, that the performance concerns raised in Halsey's review were not substantiated by the available evidence, that several of the documented claims contained factual inaccuracies that raised concerns about the integrity of the review process itself, and that Nora Caldwell's performance record demonstrates consistent excellence at the highest level of her role. There was a second document attached to the determination. It was addressed not to Nora, but to the firm's board of directors and the parent company's compliance division. It recommended a formal investigation into the circumstances surrounding the review's initiation and the discrepancies identified in Halsey's supporting documentation. Nora read both documents in her office, alone, with the door closed. She read them twice, the way she had read the original notice 2 months earlier. Then she set them both down on her desk, in the center of the blotter, in exactly the same spot where the letter had been. She allowed herself 30 seconds of stillness. Then she picked up the phone and called Raymond Osai Kapoor. "It came through," she said. "I know," he said. "I saw the compliance referral. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. And she was, not in a performing strength way, not in a suppressing how hard this was way, but genuinely. The last 2 months had been exhausting in the specific grinding way that comes from being required to prove something that should not have needed proving. It had cost her sleep and weekends and a level of emotional labor that nobody on that review board would ever fully understand. She was tired in a way that would take time to recover from, but she was fine. "What happens now?" Raymond asked. "The investigation," she said, "and then, depending on what they find, whatever comes after that." There was a pause. Raymond said, "You know most people would have folded." "I know," she said. "Most people would have taken a settlement offer and been quiet." "I know that too." "Why didn't you?" Nora thought about it. She had thought about it, actually. Not just as a rhetorical question, but as a real one, in the dark hours of early morning, when the file was open on her laptop, and her husband was asleep, and she was alone with the numbers and the dates. And the question of whether it was worth it, because someone else would have been next, she said. And the next person might not have had 6 years of documentation. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Send me the final determination. I want to keep a copy." She sent him the file. Edmund Halsey was placed on administrative leave, pending the investigation. The announcement went out to senior staff on a Wednesday morning. In an email from the parent company's HR division that was very carefully worded and said very little explicitly but implied everything that needed to be implied. Nora was in a client meeting when the email arrived. She found out about it afterward, when Phyllis handed her a printout with a look on her face that was not quite a smile, but was in the vicinity of one. She read the email standing up, in the hallway outside the conference room, with the sounds of the city coming through the windows behind her. Then she handed the printout back to Phyllis and said, "File it. With the rest?" Phyllis asked. "With the rest," Nora said. She went back to her office. She had a 3 o'clock with the compliance team and a 4:30 she needed to prepare for, and the week was already behind in the way Mondays always were. And there was still the Q3 exposure analysis she'd been trying to finish since Thursday. She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. The analysis was right where she'd left it. She found her place in the spreadsheet, the one with the nested formulas and the color-coded risk categories, the one that only she and 2 other people in the firm fully understood, and she went back to work. 3 months later, Nora received a message from a woman named Kezia Brandt Holloway, who worked in risk management at a firm in Charlotte. Kezia had heard the story secondhand through a mutual contact, in the way stories move through professional circles when people decide they are worth passing on. She wrote to Nora through LinkedIn, a careful, formal message, not quite asking for advice, but also clearly asking for advice. She was 44 years old, she wrote. She had been with her firm for 11 years. Her new director had arrived 6 months ago. He had restructured her team. He had taken credit for her analysis in a board presentation. He had told her in a one-on-one that her communication style was a concern. She had started building a file, she said. She wasn't sure if it would matter. She wasn't sure if she had enough. She wasn't sure if it was worth the fight. Nora read the message twice. She was in the middle of a full week, behind on 2 projects, tired in the residual way. She still sometimes was even 3 months out. She thought about the cost-benefit of responding, which is the kind of cold calculation that risk analysts sometimes make about everything, including things they shouldn't. Then she wrote back. She wrote for 40 minutes. She told Kezia to keep building the file. She told her to keep records of everything, emails, meeting notes, document versions with metadata, timestamps. She told her to get an attorney she trusted before she thought she needed one. She told her the process would be exhausting and would cost more than she expected in ways that were not only financial. She told her to do it anyway. She told her that the file would matter, that documentation matters, that the truth, laid out clearly and supported by evidence, is harder to dismiss than people assume, and that the people who try to dismiss it will very often dismiss it sloppily in ways that reveal what they are actually doing. She told her that calm is a strategy. She did not tell Kezia that it would definitely work. She did not promise her a clean outcome or a tidy ending or a moment in a conference room where the right people say the right things and the wrong people see their own reflection. She had been in enough rooms to know that things do not always resolve the way they should. What she said at the end of the message was this: "Someone once told me that the most dangerous thing you can do to a person who wants to make you disappear is to make yourself impossible to ignore. I don't know if that's always true, but I know it was true for me." She sent the message. Then she closed her laptop, put on her coat, and took the elevator down to the parking garage where her car had been waiting since 7:30 that morning, which was when Nora Caldwell always arrived, and when she always intended to leave earlier than she did, and when the work was always already there, the same as it had ever been, present, demanding, and entirely hers.